Okay, everyone, we are on Facebook or YouTube Live. Liz, you should have capability to share screen. I'm all set on this side, Jeremy, whenever you guys are ready.
Okay, I think we have everyone.
I don't see Aaron.
I think he's on vacation.
Yeah, he wasn't able to make it today.
All right, well, I suppose we should get started. It's 7. So thank all council members for taking the time to hear an update. Where tonight Liz is going to touch on some changes we've made as a result of our last work session in February, and touch on some new sections of the code that we've been working on that we need some feedback so we can make some revisions and keep moving ahead. So we have a fair amount to cover. So I'll kick it over to Liz and she can start us through our presentation.
Great, thank you, Jeremy, and nice to see all of you council members again. I know it's only been a few months since we last kind of had that check-in, but we've done a lot of work since then. So excited to kind of bring you up to speed. So to remind you all where we are in this process, I kind of highlighted it here. We're right smack in the middle of phase 3. So we are drafting the regulations. At this point, we are pretty much done with the zoning districts and use regulations. We're still fine tuning those a little bit and may continue to tweak those as we finish up the process, but that's pretty standard. And then we now have a full draft of the dimensional and design standards and the parking and landscaping chapters. We are next going to be getting into signage and lighting and then finishing up with administration and definitions. And we're still on track to have a full draft by the end of the summer and go through the adoption process in the fall. This is just kind of a check-in reminder of where we've been and how we've gotten to this point in the process. We started this just about a year ago. We had our first public meeting in July, and then have had planning commission updates, public meetings, in the fall and in January of this year. In February, we had a check-in with you all, and then we're here in April. And then our next step in May is to release a partial draft of the code, post that to the website to allow the public to review the whole kind of everything we've done so far, put that out there, allow people to have the time to review it and then send comments in. And for us to address those over the next few months. So I wanted to start with our proposed zoning map changes. We've made some strategic changes to the map based on our last advisory committee meeting and our meeting in February. Again, this is a reminder of what your current zoning map looks like. I just really like this comparison, and what your proposed zoning map looks like. Much easier to read. Much easier to follow. I wanted to highlight a few of the changes that we've made since our last meeting. So the first, we discussed changing the limited industrial parcels along Tiedemann south of 480 from limited industrial to general business. This is the Key Commons development, and the Starbucks and Chipotle and gas stations are across the street. These commercial developments, changing those, putting those in the general business zoning district, which those all those uses are permitted uses or conditional uses in the general business district. So that'll allow for really an ease and review if any of these parcels redevelop or change in the future. Next, we are proposing to change the Terraces at Northridge property on Biddle from single-family dwelling house to apartment house. This is just to bring an existing development, bring their zoning in conformance with their existing use. So it is not a single-family development today. It is a multifamily development today. And so bringing it into the apartment house dwelling, again, just solidifies that their zoning will match their use. Next, we are proposing some kind of strategic changes to a couple little parcels in and around Memphis. There are a couple vacant parcels that the city owns along Memphis. We have one here that's recently had a parcel demolished on it. Changing those parcels into putting those into dwelling house to allow those parcels to either develop with single family, two family, or attached townhome projects. We are proposing to change the Westbrook townhomes that are right here. They are currently zoned apartment house. We're proposing to change those to dwelling house, which would allow basically to reflect their existing development. And I should just kind of clarify, your single family dwelling house zone only allows for single family detached traditional single family development. The dwelling house zone, that light orange, allows for single family, two family, and detached single family, so townhomes. And then your brown apartment house allows for all of those in addition to multifamily. So again, bringing those townhomes into conformance with that dwelling house district. And then also changing the zone of this vacant parcel here, bringing that as dwelling house to allow for that parcel to either develop with single family or potentially an attached product if they're townhomes. I think that's the primary changes within that area. Next, we talked about this from the beginning. We are proposing these two new zoning districts. We originally started with a combined zoning district for your parks and open space and your public facilities. We are now proposing to divide those up so that it is clear to the public which parcels are dedicated for parks and which parcels are dedicated to public facilities such as schools and large churches, government facility buildings, those kinds of uses. So you can see how those are divided at the moment or proposed. And then lastly, we have the two discussion areas, the single family parcels along Manoa and then the single family parcels on Ridge. Those have been kind of in discussion over the past few months of whether we should bring those into conformance with their surrounding uses, or if we should leave them alone and leave their single family current zoning designations as is. At the moment, we are showing them leaving their as single family dwelling house as they currently are zoned. But again, in the future, if situations change or somebody decides to buy up all of those parcels or that whole street, those we could, that could be reevaluated at that time, or also relooked at the next time that this process is done in the next 10 or so years, or whenever the city decides to do that.
Liz, if I could just jump in real quick and say that, we've heard from residents in along Manoa, specifically with some concerns about just this discussion and the potential that if their properties were rezoned from single family to light industrial, the potential impact on the value of their houses and resale, and then also, potentially difficulty with financing the sale, being a non-conforming use. So I reached out to the board of realtors and asked for a recommendation of a residential real estate professional who might be able to provide a little bit of context and background about this kind of circumstance from a market perspective. And then I reached out to a mortgage officer who works for a bank that I'm familiar with, just to ask about financing and how a bank or the federal government who backs mortgages looks at this circumstance, just for background. So the real estate agent suggested that, being a non-conforming use in today's market, that there would be really no impact to those houses if they were rezoned today, light industrial, but still single family, because the market is so hot and there's such limited supply. She did feel that if they were rezoned and a developer came and bought them over time, that act would have the impact on the marketability and saleability of those remaining houses over a period of time, which would be reflective of if they were single family and being bought by someone who wanted to develop them, or if they were light industrial and being bought by a developer who wanted to buy them and was tearing them down, periodically. She also felt, if this was one street and it was completely surrounded by light industrial, that could have an impact on value as well, just because it wouldn't be quite the environment maybe you would want to live in. And then from the financing perspective, the mortgage officer, she explained that almost all mortgages are backed by the federal government, and that when the appraiser goes out and does the appraisal of the property, they're looking at highest and best use. And she said, the majority of the time, the highest and best use matches the zoning, but it doesn't always have to. So in her mind, if it's a single family street currently, but it's zoned commercially, the highest and best use is probably, going to be single family as part of that appraisal. Now, where you reach an inflection point, she felt, was when you have properties that have been bought and redeveloped on a street or in an area as commercial, or if over time they were being bought up. At some point, the highest and best use for those houses is probably the commercial use that's surrounding it. So it could happen with or without the zoning, was sort of the point, just by the nature of how the surrounding area evolves. So I just thought I'd throw that out as some context and for the discussion. I see Sue and Kathy both have their hand up.
So I have the advantage of hearing this a second time in an hour. But even the first time, Jeremy, there were some really big concerns when you were talking about that. Because first of all, the housing market is hot today. It could very well be not hot next year, much less 5 years from now. So I did not feel comfortable with that report from the realtor. And also having a personal experience. My father lives on Crossview in Seven Hills. And, for better or worse, he was a holdout. They took down all of his neighbors' houses. And he is one of the few houses left on that part of Crossview. He has no house value. And, we could say, well, he should have sold it, because his children certainly told him that. But the 3 houses to the left of him and like 4 houses to the right of him are gone. And he literally is the only house left standing. That has no value. His house has no value. and it's such a small street, and it's such a unique street in Brooklyn. I think we just need to be really careful. And I know we're moving on to another section, so I don't want to take up a lot of Liz's time on this, and I know we can come back to it, but I think like we're hearing from the residents, maybe not a lot of them. I'd like to hear from more of them, but what you reported doesn't make me feel better about it. It actually is causing me more concern. And I don't know how to put my hand down.
Sue, just to clarify your question, do you mean your concern is, I mean, if the city is backing away from this, saying the residents want it to remain single family, is that's your concern, that we're backing away and keeping?
No, I'm concerned about moving forward and rezoning this.
Okay, so you want to keep it single
Yeah.
family. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what we're proposing.
Yes.
The status quo.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was proposing. I wasn't advocating for the change.
Oh,
I was just kind of relaying some information just because people had asked the question. And
Yes.
so I asked the question because I didn't really know the answers.
Okay.
So
okay.
I would agree. I would agree with your assessment. You know,
Okay.
you don't want to be in your dad's situation on CrossFit.
I don't want to do that to anybody.
No,
on my
you
board.
don't want to do that to me. I agree.
Even though he did it to himself, I don't want anybody on Manoa to do it to themselves.
I think what Jeremy's assessment says is, I think that there still needs to be the understanding to these residents. This may happen from the market, whether this is rezoned or not, and they need to be aware of that.
So Jeremy, and Katie, thanks for clarifying that, because I wasn't 100% sure if, if you were saying we're just going to back away from this now and forget about it, or if it was still going to be under consideration. But I didn't quite understand, Jeremy, when you mentioned that the realtor mentioned that one street of residential completely surrounded by light industrial. Were you saying that could have a negative impact on their future value, or could you explain that a little better?
I think what she meant is, if fast forward, 10 years and the Manoa stays what it is, and south of it is a warehouse building, and north of it's a warehouse building, and behind it is a big Amazon building, that development around it could have a negative impact on value, just because of the nature of it developing in a non-residential way around that current single family road. That's what that's what I took it to mean.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
May I ask a question real quick? I don't know how to raise my hand on this thing.
Sure.
I was not able to be at the last one, but I'm in agreement with Mrs. Grodick. I don't see any advantage to moving forward with rezoning this, and especially in light of with what you just said. I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but I mean, leaving it as is, leaving it the status quo, the market will dictate what happens around it, then the market will dictate what happens with those homes. And so I don't know that we need to rezone it just for the sake of, because everything else around it is that way. So I would agree that I appreciate you doing your homework on this with the realtor and with the mortgage company, but I don't think it makes any sense to move forward with rezoning, at least that portion of Manoa. Are we still discussing the portion on Ridge, or are you kind of suggesting the same for both?
The city's position is that, we have a lot of great changes that could advance our city forward, and this shouldn't be the holdup. We will keep it single family, and we want to see positive changes. If there are residents uncomfortable with it, we'll keep it single family. But for informational purposes, I think it's important to get the information out there, regardless of the decision.
Sure. No, I understand that. That's why I said I appreciate the information. Everything you said makes complete sense. But I'm a big proponent of letting the market do what the market does, and rezoning it doesn't seem to make any sense at this time to me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Are we good to move on?
I think we're good.
Sorry, so what about the property by the Westbrooks?
The Rabbit Run property.
Yes, sorry.
Is that this one?
Yeah, I believe that's what Kathy's referring to.
Yes, that was the third one that was under consideration for a
Yeah,
change.
well, we did propose changing that zoning from, it's currently apartment house. So down zoning that to dwelling house that would allow for single family detached units, 2-family units, or townhomes to be developed. Which from our discussion last time, Liz and I both felt that was the direction we received from council.
And I just have a kind of, I guess, a procedural question about that. So the current owner's grandfathered in under the current zoning, if this is to change, if they sell it, are they grandfathered in also? For example, if it does change to dwelling and they sold it after it changed, where does that property stand then?
I would
Liz?
say, yeah, I would say it depends on when they want to develop it, not when it's sold.
And I would say that they would only be grandfathered in as apartment house if they had an approved site plan in. Your existing zoning doesn't guarantee you development rights unless it's developed. If it's a vacant property and you change the zoning of it, you can't go back and develop it under your original zoning. You would have to develop it as the zoning that it is the day that you submit that application to develop it.
Okay, thank you.
Because it's vacant now, right? I was under that assumption.
It is. It's vacant.
Yeah, that property is actually up on sheriff sale in like 4 weeks.
Yeah, so if somebody came in next week with an application under the current zoning, then yes, they would have that, they would have to meet those existing apartment house regulations. And if the zoning was changed, they would still, and they, had that approved plan and it was approved by planning commission, they would still be able to keep that. But if that doesn't happen, then any new development will occur under the new zoning, if that's the timing that happens.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to use standards. So this is more of a recap from our last meeting. We talked a lot about self-storage, small format, these vape tobacco stores and check cashing. So we just kind of wanted to confirm what we heard at that last meeting for self-storage. We are proposing that they are conditional uses in the general industrial district and that they must be between 2 and 3 stories in height and that access happens within the building. So that would prevent the single story garage doors on the outside self-storage that you typically think of when you think of self-storage. But a lot of the newer self-storage are kind of internal to the building and multi-story, and those are also higher quality typically. So it would allow that type of self-storage, but they also then would have to be separated by at least 3,000 feet apart from each other. And then the small format stores, vape tobacco stores, and check cashing, those would all be conditional uses in just the general business district. And then we are also proposing a 3,000 foot spacing requirement for those uses. And I wanted to kind of explain where we got that 3,000 to, and to kind of confirm if that spacing sounds appropriate to you all, or if you think that should be increased or decreased. So the properties on Ridge Road that are zone general business, there's only 3,190 feet of frontage of continuous general business frontage on Ridge Road. And that's really, again, in the kind of southern portion of Ridge Road, from just above 480 to down to Brook Park on 480. So that is just over 3,000 foot of frontage for those parcels. And then Brook Park currently is about 2/3 general business right now, and then like a third light industrial. We're proposing to change all of Brook Park to the general business zoning district. So if that happens, Brook Park Road has over 12,000 feet of frontage within the city limits. In that proposed scenario. So with that 3,000 foot spacing requirement, you technically could possibly get 2 of these uses individually, each of these uses on Ridge Road if you had perfect spacing. But again, that's probably not going to happen. And the existing uses within and around Ridge Road is probably going to prevent any additional uses in that area. And then with Brook Park Road, you could potentially have up to 4. Again, if they had perfect spacing with just over 12,000 feet of frontage, there really would have to be like 1 right at the beginning and then spaced exactly 3,000 feet apart, which is not likely to happen. And so it's probably more likely that you would have 1 or 2 along that frontage and not 4. So does that sound appropriate? Does that sound like a reasonable, spacing requirement, or do you think that should be raised or lowered? Any comments on that? I see Kathleen.
Thank you. First, when you talk about that they have to be 2 to 3 stories, that's eliminating the 1 story altogether. And I understand we don't want the access from the outside. I think everyone's on the same page. And I guess the only reason I'm asking is just because I'm aware of one. It's in Rocky River, and I believe it's I think it was a Target. And they have one that you access all from the inside, but it is 1 story. And I'm not advocating either way. I'm just bringing that up, that you can have the access from the inside without having 2 to 3 stories. And I don't know.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm saying in that scenario, that kind of big box conversion to self-storage, those big box uses within your city are either zoned retail business or general business. And we're only proposing to allow self-storage in the general industrial. And so that conversion of a retail into storage, we're already saying you can't do that.
Okay, good.
So if you're thinking that you want to allow that kind of conversion, then we need to rethink.
No. I was just bringing up the point.
Yeah. So this is really, that the industrial storage and probably new or conversion, but then, it's really dissuading self-storage from coming altogether.
And I guess my only comment on the 3,000 feet is that 4 kind of sounds like a lot to me. And I realize that it would all have to be spaced perfectly. But seeing as we really don't know, we don't ever know what the future holds. And certainly these types of uses bring in nothing to our city, like no value whatsoever, either aesthetically or financially. I don't know. Can we stretch that where it's greater than 3,000 feet? I don't know how other people feel about it.
I'm in agreement with Mrs. Pucci when it comes to we're talking about like the check cashing places, right? Is what we're talking about right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I'm in agreement with her too. I believe, if I remember correctly, there were 2 on Brook Park Road. I believe they both closed. Have they not? They were up by Home Depot.
The one by Home Depot is closed. Yes. Okay.
All right. And then there was a second one as well that was there that it's sitting vacant, I believe. It was was it a Pizza Hut? They converted into a check cashing place right next to Long John Silver's. And I think it sits empty as well.
That building is empty as well. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I don't know. Legally, are we allowed to? Is there certain requirements that we have to stay within, as far as, spacing requirement? Because I'm in agreement. Those places bring no value. In fact, I think they hurt cities, to be honest with you. Having them in our city. Obviously, people have the right to, put their business where they put their business. But stretching that out, is that possible, Liz, or is that about what it should be?
I mean, we can continue to talk to Kevin Butler about this. Really, it's kind of his call if he thinks it's a justifiable distance. But we have seen spacing requirements. I've seen down to like 1,000 to 2,000 feet, but I've also seen up to a mile, and I've seen 2 miles as well. Any distance we'd want to run through legal, obviously, but I don't feel like there's enough. I don't feel like this has been tested enough to really kind of know and have like a for sure, 3,000 is okay, but 5,000 isn't. So I think it's kind of up to you all that, I think you want to make sure that people feel like you're not banning the use altogether, because that I think puts you in a legal issue.
Right.
And so it's kind of that, where's your middle ground? But I think if you were between 3 and 5, you're probably okay. Or maybe, between that like 2 and 5, or, 2,000 and a mile. I'm based on the size of your city, I'm not sure I would recommend that you go bigger than a mile. But again, this is completely up to you all and what your legal counsel feels is appropriate.
Yeah. In my personal opinion, and I'll let someone else have, in my personal opinion, with these things, to me, the furthest apart you can get them, the better. I don't think they bring any value. I think, like I said, I think they hurt your city. And so, obviously Mr. Butler will be the legal mind behind this one, but I would be fine with, I think was what Kathy was suggesting, is making that even more for this particular use.
Hey, Liz, quick question. You've got to be consistent. If you're 3,000 feet on one street, you got to be 3,000 feet on the other streets as well. Okay.
I mean, if you can get creative with zoning, but I'm not sure you want to say that you would have a 3,000 foot spacing on Ridge and a 5,000 foot spacing on Brook Park. I'm not sure how you would justify that. I think your easiest thing is to have one standard, and that applies. And it would be a distance kind of as the crow flies. So it would apply kind of like that.
Otherwise you're getting into trouble.
Yeah.
Yep.
I agree with all of you guys as well. I was even thinking about it sitting during the zoning advisory committee one, like, even if we can stretch it to the 3,500, it would eliminate likely one on Brook Park, and then Brook Park and Ridge are, share the same corner. So it just, because even with this, and then you have that little bit of space on like by Memphis and Tiedemann, I think, that allows this business as well. And so, you could, if it were spaced right, which I get, is a big if, but could get about 6 of them in the city, which is a lot for a small city like Brooklyn. So I agree. I would be in favor of stretching it out a little bit more if Director Butler is okay with it.
And we're talking about all of these uses, just to clarify, the payday lending, the self-storage. Okay, you just brought it back up, in the vape, tobacco, all of them. Okay.
Yeah, so we are proposing that all of these would have a spacing from each, like from themselves, but like you could have all of these in a row. Like they don't have a spacing requirement from each other. They just have a spacing requirement from themselves. And I do think it's smart to have the same spacing requirement. You'd have to have, I think, a very specific reason to have like a bigger spacing requirement for small format stores than vape to stores. Like that seems arbitrary. But I think if it sounds like, if we can get that to 5,000 or a mile, if Mr. Butler thinks that's appropriate and okay, then that's, we should do that. That sounds like what I'm hearing.
That is what I would like to see. Yes.
Yeah, we'll go back and circle back with Kevin and try to find a place where he's comfortable, and we've spaced them as much as we can.
And we can continue to look into this, from now until when we finish the code. There might be legal decisions that come out. There might be other, studies that come out. So we'll continue to kind of look into this. And if it needs to be adjusted up and down kind of between now and the end, based on any new information that comes out, we can do that. We'll just keep you all updated on any time we do that or need to.
Hey, Liz, one last question. You mentioned a 3,000 foot spacing. So it's between small format discount store, small format discount store, versus you could have a vape store next to each other, and as long as they're 3,000 feet apart, you know, the combinations. But why couldn't the 3,000 be between in each category, but also from any different category?
Good question. I think that would be a legal question of if we can buffer from other uses. I know that there are certain uses that require buffering from like residential and, you know, schools and churches and things like that.
Right.
But it's not very typical that you see a buffer requirement from another commercial use. But again, it's something we can bring up with legal and see what their opinion is, and we can report back.
Okay, thank you.
All right. We're gonna move on to dimensional standards. So this is now new regulations that we haven't discussed with you yet. These were drafted in the last 2 months. So dimensional standards are all the requirements in a code that regulate basically where a building can be in a lot and the size that the lot has to be. And so the biggest changes we made to dimensional standards was in your existing single family zoning district, your SFDH zoning district. This was really highlighted, especially because the First Suburbs Consortium has been studying the basically single family development patterns in all the first suburbs. And they provided some feedback and kind of study and analysis to the city on where your existing lots don't meet your lot width requirements, your lot size requirements, your setback requirements. So we looked at that and looked at, you know, kind of how your existing lot sizes are typically, and are proposing some changes to that to reflect that and to hopefully bring the majority of your single family lots into conformance, where the majority of your lots today don't meet one or multiple of the dimensional standards that apply to them. So with these single family, most of them, basically on this table, side yard setback and below and down are staying the same. Those are dimensional standards that seem to be working pretty well. We've discussed this at length with Jeremy and his team. So those we're not proposing to change, but we are proposing to change lot width, lot size, and front yard setback. So I'm going to kind of go over that with you. So with lot width, that's again the width of of your residential lot. Your existing regulation is for 75 feet. We're proposing to reduce that down to 50. So most of the lots in Brooklyn are between 40 feet and 60 feet in width today. And more than 90% are 40 feet in width or greater. So really 40 feet is kind of your lower end, but most fall within that 40 to 60 range. And then your newer subdivisions within Brooklyn typically have widths between 50 and 60. So we're proposing 50 feet. Again, this would apply only to new lots that are platted. Existing lots that are at, 45 feet would still be fine. They'd be really in the same position they are today. We're specifically trying not to take that down too small because we don't want people to try and subdivide existing single family lots into 2 lots where really they don't have the room to do that. We want to make sure that there's, if somebody had a large lot and they wanted to cut it up, that they need to have the adequate space to do that. And we don't want somebody to try and do that on, where they don't have the space to do that. Yes, is that a hand up or is that an old hand up?
Yep. No, thank you. So, the idea, which I wasn't involved when it changed, but the idea behind increasing it is because people generally don't want to be living on top of each other. So is the goal to just bring the existing lots into conformance Or we're saying that anything moving forward, we want them to be closer than 75 feet?
So this
Or
was
both?
really, I mean, it's really a policy decision for you all moving forward. But this exercise was really intended to bring existing lots into conformance with the zoning district that they're in, which makes, if, a homeowner wants to put on a small addition or remodel, it makes that process much easier, that if they don't have to get variances for their setbacks or variances, because their lot is non-conforming. This is just going to make that easier. But again, if you as a city say, we don't want any lot to be platted within Brooklyn that's less than 75 feet wide, then leave that regulation as it is today. It's really up to you all.
I think from the building department perspective, they were trying to strike a balance of bringing the existing lots closer to being conforming, and then also trying to match future development with some of the larger lots that have been developed more recently, which were the 50 to 60 in lot width. So that's why we were proposing the 50 as a compromise. And will be the same thing for lot size and front yard setback when we talk about those as well. It's trying to do both. It's trying to bring existing lots into conformance, which is really part of the first suburbs work, and then also allow future development to occur that's more in line or closer to being in line with development patterns that already exist within the neighborhoods.
So I guess one of my concerns is, if we ever are able to carve out an area where we're able to build not, really super large homes, but homes that are in line with what people are looking for when, they're moving up. I guess I'm just concerned with the lot width and also the lot size. I'm just concerned that, again, if we're ever able to find a spot in the city where we can build some of these homes to retain the people who have moved out, because we really don't have much to offer in the little bit larger homes, would we be able to do that basically on the smaller lots?
That is a good point. It is, you can think about these are minimums. And so it's not stopping somebody from building larger homes. Really it'd be up to developer to, build whatever they think there is the market for. But you have to start somewhere. But again, it is up to the city of if you kind of only want larger lots moving forward, or if you want to kind of have lots that are similar to what has been developed recently.
And I understand that they could build the house, but it wouldn't be are people going to be interested in buying a house where, most of you're going to be at the maximum as far as your house taking up your lot. So, and I realize that 75 feet might be, too wide for the type of city we are. I'm just expressing a concern going down to 50. I know our lot is 55 wide, and I feel like we're very close, like on top of our neighbors.
Other comments on that?
Liz, you did answer part of my question. That is a minimum, the lot size. Certainly if a developer maybe on Rabbit Run wanted to build larger houses with larger lots, they could do that. That wouldn't stop them, correct? All right. And then I do like the 50. I think that does conform with what we see in our city. And that doesn't necessarily say that you have to build a smaller house, because there are some, part of the problem with our houses is that we have so many ranches. I mean, you could almost double the square feet if you had a second story on it. So I think you could still get a comfortable 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath house on a smaller lot. And I kind of feel like if you're going to live in an inner ring suburb, then you need to expect your neighbor to be pretty close. If you want the large lot, then you need to move out farther away from Cleveland. So I like the 50.
Any other comments? All right, well, we can cover the next topics, and then if there are any other thoughts, we can circle back to. So lot size is the next one. Your current regulations is 10,000 square feet. We're proposing 7,500 square feet. And right now, only 10% of the lots within Brooklyn meet that 10,000 foot lot size requirement. And if we reduced it down to 7,500, that would bring 77% of the lots into conformance. So that, wait, 75 lots are smaller inside. Yes, yeah, sorry. It would bring 77% of the lots into conformance. And that's kind of where that number came from as well. And then we also thought about that if you had 50 feet in width to meet that 7,500, that's a 50 by 150 lot, which is a pretty kind of standard size lot. And so it's an appropriate, we kind of thought that made sense from a size development standpoint as well. And then lastly is a front yard setback. So your current regulations is 40 feet, and we're proposing to reduce that down to 25. So most of your lots in Brooklyn have a 20-foot setback or bigger. We're proposing that at 25 feet to kind of, again, address not your tightest front yard setbacks, but to kind of find a happy medium. But then we also we're also proposing to add in a kind of a modification stipulation that if you are on a street and your whole street is, your houses are 10 feet from your property line in the front, then you can bring up and have a front yard setback that is consistent with your neighbors. So the regulation says that you kind of measure 300 feet out from your property and you take the average of all your neighbors. And then that average becomes your front setback requirement if that is less than 25 feet. If it's more than 25 feet, you can still have the 25 feet though.
And that will be written in the code?
Yes.
That makes sense.
All right. We also are proposing to add in standards specifically for townhomes and attached single family developments. Your current code didn't really address that in any way. So we are proposing a different front yard setback depending on if a townhome project had parking in the front or parking in the rear. So if you have an attached product with parking in the front, like this upper picture, we want you to have at least a 20-foot front yard setback so that a car can park in your driveway without hanging into the street or over the sidewalk. And so that, basically we're going to push that back a little bit to account for that driveway and that car parking. But if you have parking in the back, if you have a back parking lot or rear garage access, we want your, a townhome project to be pushed closer to the street. And so if your parking is in the back, you actually have a 20-foot maximum setback. So we're still having some flexibility in that to allow for, some outdoor space if they wanted to have, patios or stoops or something like out front. But we, are kind of requiring that they can't be super pushed back on a property that we're bringing that closer to the street, which is in line with the master plan recommendations for development. We also are basically removing the side yard setbacks for attached structures, these condos and townhomes typically have property lines that go down the middle of a building. So a side yard setback isn't applicable, but we are making sure that there is a setback between buildings. So if you have separate, separate chunks of buildings together, that those buildings have to be at least 10 feet apart from each other, which also conforms with building code requirements for spacing as well.
Can I ask a quick question before you move on?
Mm-hmm.
What is the reason for setting a maximum for the front if there's no driveway? What's the purpose of that?
To really achieve that kind of traditional townhome feel. The master plan talked about having buildings closer to the street. And if you don't have that garage in the front, having that kind of typical development is desirable, and really kind of the ideal development pattern for these kinds of uses. I mean, we're doing the same thing, not maximum requirements, but we're reducing front yard setbacks for your business developments and your, like in your retail business and your general business, we're allowing buildings to get closer to the street. So it's just kind of pushing people towards that. But again, if Jeremy has anything else he wants to add.
Right, I get that, but why? Like, what is the rationale behind it?
I mean, it's really just because that's what the type of development you want to promote. And so this is just requiring that, and not allowing, so you could just put a 0 foot, setback and allow people to put it where you want. I guess that would be kind of the alternative. This just kind of makes sure that people push things towards the street. Not sure if that still gave you enough answers.
Well, I mean, I get that this would push people towards the street. I guess what I don't understand is what is the purpose for doing that? Like, why are we trying to push people towards the street?
To align with the recommendations of your master plan.
The master plan talked about on the larger streets having buildings and houses, these types of houses closer to the right of way, to start to establish more of like more of a common like semi-urban streetscape. So instead of having the building set really far back with grass in the front, it gives an option to have it closer to the sidewalk, to kind of frame in the public realm, and have those buildings closer. So that's what this regulation is trying to do, is to provide the guidance to someone who wanted to build this kind of product, that depending on where they wanted to have their garage access and access into the structures, would depend on where they would sit on the property. So that's really the intent of it, is just to meet sort of that overarching philosophy that's described in the master plan of creating and framing the public realm, bringing the buildings closer to the street to create that sort of semi-urban streetscape.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add on just to that, Jeremy? When
Sure.
we were on the master plan committee, we compared it to the couple of businesses that are on Ridge Road near Memphis, that where they're pushed up in the front and the parking's in the back, and it just gives a more walkable feel to the community. And that was what, when we did the surveys with all the Post-its and the color dots, that's what a lot of people said that they wanted, that feeling of an urban walkable community where it didn't have a lot of parking in the front. So that kind of gives that feel to those townhouses.
Thanks, Sue.
All right, thanks.
All right, I'm going to keep it moving then. So for the business districts, we just kind of like the conversation we just had, We did review the dimensional requirements and did reduce those down to allow for more flexibility in building and bringing buildings closer to the street and having, more flexible kind of lot sizes in the business districts. And that really is to promote infill development and to promote, again, that kind of businesses to the front near the street with the parking to the side or the rear. In the business districts, we're not requiring it because we know that you have such a variety of business developments depending on where you are in the city. So it didn't seem appropriate to have, require new development to be towards the street, but we are allowing that to happen. And the master plan, again, will promote that to occur in the right locations as well. The infill standards we are allowing is to kind of promote the redevelopment of some of your large parking lots that may not be productive or being used at this moment. So the regulations will allow for the creation of outlots where there could been previously parking. So kind of in the example graphic, if you just kind of had previously a large parking lot, this would allow you to kind of cut up and carve up some of that parking area to create new developments if you can fit it and you have the right access and circulation to make that occur. Again, this is a little bit of an extreme situation where we're showing like 6 outlots. Probably a lot of cases it may be where you could fit like 1 or 2 in a parking lot. But again, it depends on what parking lot we're talking about and how much space you have. For mixed use buildings, we're including new regulations for mixed uses because this is really something that your existing code doesn't address. So for mixed use structures, we have specific requirements and a little bit actually more flexibility if you do vertically mix a building. So if you have like this upper picture, if you have a commercial or office on the first floor with residential or office above, your maximum height is going to be increased from 35 to 50 feet. But we also have a stipulation in there that if your mixed use building is over 30, that you're going to have an increased setback from single family residential to make sure that you're not having larger buildings right up against single family, that there is more separation from that. But we are allowing more flexibility in that height at the same time. We're also have stipulations for internal access and cross parking to make sure that there's not kind of like individual parking lots for uses, that's thought through as kind of a cohesive thing within a project, requiring pedestrian amenities. So, sidewalks along the front of a building, sidewalks within parking areas, making sure that there's a pedestrian connection from the sidewalk along the street to the front door of a building. For larger mixed use projects, we're requiring open space and public space amenities to be included, like pocket parks or seating areas, gazebos, that kind of thing, walking trails. And then mixed use buildings would also be required to adhere to the architectural standards that we are proposing that will apply citywide. For your industrial districts and the public and institutional districts, there wasn't a lot of changes. I don't know if there was any to the industrial district dimensional standards. Those seem to be working well for you all. And there was no need to make any significant changes to those regulations. We did create new regulations for the public and open space districts. Those are new districts, so obviously we had to create regulations. And so the setback and lot size standards were really done to reflect kind of what we thought the ideal development of those properties would be, but to also allow flexibility because those zones allow for a variety, government uses and public uses can take shape in a lot of different ways. So we wanted to make sure that there was flexibility in there to meet the demand of the different types of uses. All right, so I'm going to move on to design standards unless anyone has any final dimensional comments. Okay. So one thing that we heard pretty loud and clear from the master plan process and from our engagement so far is that Brooklyn wants to have higher quality design and higher quality architecture and buildings within the city. So we are proposing citywide architectural standards to make all development except single family and two family adhere to a higher quality of architectural and building design standards. So this is a nice little graphic representation of that. This top picture is a shopping center very close to my house down here in Cincinnati. It is really hideously ugly, super monotonous. It is, we're actively working with the city to try and have them upgrade this. There's no landscaping. It's just a very typical suburban shopping center, to something like this bottom one, which is also a strip shopping center, but you have a variety of architectural building materials, architectural styles. You have a variety in your roof form. You have landscaping. You still have good window openings and pedestrian amenities. So, same size, same scale of development, but a very distinct difference of experience and quality of design. So that's the intent of where these regulations are stemming from. So the regulations will address building style and character. We talk about not having monotonous buildings like that shopping center I showed you. We have specific building materials that are required and prohibited building materials, pedestrian oriented developments, language to speak to that. Architectural treatment, so requiring bump outs, projections, patios, those kind of things, so that there's variety in kind of the depth of a building. Promoting a variety of roof forms and dynamic roof forms, requiring window openings on ground levels for that kind of commercial pedestrian experience. And then also requiring the screening of your not ideal kind of elements of a building. So your electrical equipment and HVAC equipment, screening that, and then also screening your dumpsters on a site. So this is a graphic that we've produced for the code to kind of illustrate some of this. Is kind of the combination of all the requirements into one building. Would be a large scale office building, but it has multiple building materials. It has that architectural kind of ins and outs and projections, your roof or your patios on the side, and then the dynamic roof as well. So this is a completely new thing from your current code. Your current code doesn't require any of this architectural or design standards. So we do want to just kind of have that check-in with you all to make sure that this is what you want and what you want to see, and that you want to see that applied to all uses, again, except single family and two family, or if you want to just require these kind of regulations on commercial and, mixed use development. So that is something that you can, make that decision on. And we want to make sure that we're all on the same page moving forward. Any thoughts?
I did mention this at the zoning advisory, but just to say it here as well, I do agree with having it for all of the buildings except for the single and two family. But I think it just makes sense to, have that higher standard. You do, I think you had mentioned, at least there's a process in place if there's, certain circumstances that they could essentially appeal and try and get the lower standards. But we might as well be, looking towards the future and really looking towards what we want our city to look like years from now as well.
Yes, we are proposing a waiver process that planning commission would have the ability through the site plan process to alter the requirements. If somebody came in and with a really creative design that was really nice and you liked it, but it didn't quite meet the requirements, we want to make sure that you have that ability to say, okay, you're meeting the intent of these requirements, even if you're not meeting it, exactly to the T. But then on the flip side, it also, if somebody comes in with something that's horrible, these requirements would require them to bring it and increase it up into the standards. All right, I see some additional hands being raised.
Thanks. Does this apply only to new construction, or would it also apply for like some sort of like major renovation?
It would apply. We are making it apply to major renovations. So if you were just like repainting your building or maintaining it, it's not going to kick in. But if you were completely redoing a front facade, that new front facade would have to meet these standards as much as it could. When we talk about, kind of having existing buildings meeting new standards, they probably can't make it, meet it 100%, but we want them to get as close as they can. And of course it would apply to everything new.
Okay. And I guess one area that I would be concerned about is Associate Avenue and Clinton. And that's not to say that, we don't want it to look nice, but just generally the types of businesses that are there. I just don't know if I see, something, I don't know, really like basically adhering to an architectural review standard. But you're saying that there would be a waiver if we thought that it was still attractive enough.
Yes. And are you talking about industrial areas?
Yes.
Okay. Industrial developments do have a little bit more flexibility in terms of, we're still saying that they can have tilt up concrete panels and high quality like metal, architectural panels. And so it is, kind of, I think, understood that industrial building is going to have a lot less articulation because that's kind of the typical. They're going to have less window openings because a lot of times they can't have window openings due to the, the nature of their business and stuff. But we want them to not just be an ugly one color box, like make them do a little bit more, make them put a nice, stone base at the bottom, have a variety of colors or textures or something, make them try to make it a little bit nicer without, requiring them to do way more than, is reasonable or typical for a community, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay. Yes. And I agree with that. Thank you.
Okay.
I just got a quick question. Everybody hear me?
Sure. Yeah.
When is Biddle Shopping Center going to look like that, which you showed on that bottom right-hand picture? I drive, so most cities, when they're putting up anything or remodeling anything, that's exactly what they look like. No matter what city you're in Cuyahoga County. That shopping center, it looks like just like any of these shopping centers that I go into, or the high-tech areas, as I call them, but that is what they're all looking like. Different kind of building material being used on the front of the buildings. But I'd love to see Biddle Shopping Center look just like that. That would be a great, great improvement.
All right. We got another hand.
Yeah, I have a question and then a comment. So my question, which kind of goes along with Kathy's, and in our industrial associates avenue area. So that would be for a building that's going through some type of renovation, not necessarily a new business going into an existing building, right?
Correct. Yeah. It would not that, if a building goes vacant and somebody else moves in and they just swap out the sign or paint it or something like that, none of this, we don't want to hurt your existing businesses. That's not the intent. It's, if you're already going to put a bunch of money, if you're already planning on a major renovation, we want you to meet these standards. You're already putting money into it. If you're doing a new business, you're going to meet these standards, so it's not going to apply. Or if you're just doing like a small, if you were just adding on like a tiny little bump out or something like that, it's not going to make you make that extremely nice and extremely different than the rest of your building. Like that's just silly.
And then my comment is, sitting on the planning commission for a few years now, a lot of times the places that are going through the major renovations or are, proposing a new building completely, like the car wash, they were very proud of bringing in good designs. They were bringing in, building supply samples to our planning commission meeting. So I would say in general, you had mentioned at our previous meeting that the first couple may kind of like push against, hey, you know, why are you expecting us to look so much better? But I mean, a lot of them like Cane's and the car wash, and they were very proud. Dunkin' Donuts, Arby's, when they remodeled, they were very proud of the innovative designs that they were bringing into our city. So I think a lot of businesses would rise up to our expectations and maybe even look at their neighbors and say, hey, why don't you spruce up a little bit too?
You know, great point. I mean, it's just like we're hearing, I would say most new development of, you know, kind of high quality development, they're already doing this. And so then there you go. But if somebody doesn't want to spend the money or doesn't want to do it, this would make them do it. So I think it's probably strikes a nice balance where we're not making this overly cumbersome, overly, you know, we're not saying it has to be brick or it has to be stone, but we are saying we want a mix of materials and we want to you want something that's nice and higher quality than, you know, what would be allowed today. All right. All right, moving on to parking. So parking and landscaping are chapters we have just drafted. They are still being reviewed by staff. Jeremy and his staff are really digging into like the specifics of the parking chapter, making sure that what we have in there makes sense for you all. And so once we have that draft, we'll make sure that, again, that gets sent around for review. But we wanted to kind of set up what the direction we're going on with parking. So your current code has parking requirements for specific uses. We are still doing that. So there will be a minimum space requirement for each use, but we are aligning that with the use table. So it'll be an exact, you know, the use list on the use table will be exactly mimicked in the parking table. So that'll be really easy for anyone that's coming in to use and understand. Here's my setbacks. Here's where I'm allowed to develop. Here's what my parking requirements are. So that be, and you know, a definition to match that as well. So it'll all be very consistent. We are reviewing those minimum space requirements and trying to make those a little bit more flexible than what they currently are. Generally, overall parking standards that were written 20, 30 years ago, we see, you know, communities still have that. And we're realizing that those parking requirements are producing seas of asphalt, which aren't really necessary anymore. And most, you know, kind of corporate franchise kind of like businesses know exactly how many parking space. Our business works with private companies as well and does development service work. And so like the gas stations we work with and some of the retail uses, like they know, they come to us and they say, okay, I need 55 spaces. Does that meet their code requirement? You know, those most uses know exactly what spacing they need, what parking they need for their use, but the table will just provide that kind of baseline. If somebody doesn't, you know, if you have like a mom and pop store or something like that, it at least provides you a starting point. But in that line also, we are adding in some additional modification allowances to allow staff to make some very small parking adjustments. If there was, you know, a change of use from like an office to a retail store and the parking requirement increased based on that change of use. But, you know, the new requirement required them to have 15 spaces, but they only had 14 spaces on the lot and they couldn't find room for that additional space. This would allow staff to kind of help them out and make that adjustment at a staff level, an administrative level, without forcing them to go through a whole process. If it was already something that was being approved by Planning Commission can also reduce, but to a greater amount. We're proposing that Planning Commission can reduce up to 50% of the requirement. And so that would allow Planning Commission to look at the overall development, you know, talk to the applicant. If somebody comes in and they know based on their corporate model, based on their number of employees, based on their, you know, whatever their situation is, they need X amount of parking spaces and it's less than you require, you can reduce that as part of that site plan approval. If it's more than 50%, that would still trigger a variance to the Board of Zoning Appeals. But by allowing planning commission to review and make modifications, that's going to make the process a lot easier and smoother because it can be done all at once with that planning commission site plan review. Additionally, we're including alternate transportation regulations. We added bicycle parking requirements, and then we also added EV electric vehicle parking standards. We're not requiring those at this point, but we are adding that in there to address that if somebody wants to do it, there's standards for them. We also updated the kind of parking spot and parking space and lot design standards to make sure that those kind of meet industry standards of today. And then we also enhanced your stacking space requirement. And we are including specific stacking requirements for different uses, whether you're a car wash or a pharmacy or an ATM or a fast food restaurant, you're going to have specific stacking space requirements you have to meet. And then we also have a stipulation in there that if you have a use that is coming in, that is a very high intensity drive-through use, that you can even require above and beyond as part of that planning commission approval with the site plan, you can approve above and beyond the minimum stacking space requirement for your Starbucks, your McDonald's, your Chick-fil-A's, those kind of uses that they're going to maybe have 15, 20 cars backed up. And you want to make sure that stacking is done out of circulation aisles, out of public right of way, that site plan takes into account that higher level of stacking need as part of that overall site design. So we wanted to have a check-in to see if there was any other parking issues that you wanted to make sure the code addressed that I didn't mention. And that if you all are comfortable with that modification process that I mentioned with the staff adjustment for small waivers, and then the planning commission being able to grant larger waivers if they're appropriate. Any comments on that? Yeah, I see one hand raised. Kathy.
So as far as staff, are you referring to our building commissioner or?
Correct. Building commissioner.
Is there a reason why doesn't it have to generally go to planning commission anyway?
I mean, I think most of the cases it would go to planning commission, but if you had like a change of use that produced a different parking requirement, it could allow a little, staff to have a little bit of flexibility if it made sense. But I'm not, I think with how you have your process set up, the majority, if not all of them, would already be going to planning commission. So planning commission would make that call. So if you don't think the staff waiver is, applicable to how you have your processes set up, we can take that out. But I think we can think through if that makes sense or not for you all.
Okay.
I think the intent with that was if you had a change of use in, like in Liz's example, where something changes and you're required to have 15 parking spaces, but you can only physically fit 13 spaces. And instead of making the business go through and get a variance, if you could handle it administratively with some kind of administrative process, it's just more streamlined and easier for businesses when they move in. So it would be really minor things, but you're right, any sort of larger site plan alterations that would all go to planning commission anyways, and they would be able to deal with it.
Any other questions or comments on parking? All right. Last topic, landscaping. So your current zoning regulations have very, very minimal landscaping requirements. So we have written a whole new chapter for landscaping, which is a big enhancement of what your current regulations speak to. So within that, we have a buffering requirements table. So when a new development comes in that is non-residential, so your offices, your industrial, your commercial uses, if they are located next to single family residential, then there's going to be a buffer and screening requirement, basically to create a 6-foot opaque screen of whatever combination that they want. There are options included. So that could be a fence and trees, like is what's shown in the picture. It could be like a double row of evergreens. It could be a mound with landscaping. So there are options built into that. So depending on the situation, that developer can choose what makes the most sense for them. And then there also are buffering requirements for when a parking lot is next to a street, that there is both a tree and a shrub buffer to help reduce the headlights shining into the street, buffer that from the street. We also are including parking lot landscaping requirements. And so that would be the landscape islands within the parking lot. And then again, we have the exterior buffering requirements in that table. We're proposing new street tree planting requirements. And then again, kind of like the parking, we are proposing that planning commission would have the ability to vary all the landscaping standards. This is very typical, as landscaping is really hard to write regulations that's going to apply perfectly in all situations. You know, you have sometimes weirdly shaped lots or areas where they couldn't get all the landscaping that's required, or they want to propose something different. You want to be able to review that, and if it makes sense and they're meeting the intent of the code, approve that. But this at least sets that bar, that standard for what you expect. And then again, if you have a unique situation, that can be reviewed and approved by planning commission if it makes sense. So again, is we just kind of want to check in and make sure that all sounds good. I know that, we're not giving you specific regulations here, but we want to make sure that this increased landscaping requirements still kind of aligns with what you were thinking. Yep. Sue.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. I had some questions / concerns about the parking lot landscapes. First, would it apply to it again? We want buildings closer to the street. So if parking is behind or on the side, but especially behind, would they still have the same landscaping, and would they need it? And then I'm also a little concerned if we're trying to reduce the parking, and then we require them to use some of that lot for landscaping islands, is that going to make it difficult for them? It might not, I don't know.
Yeah, I would say the majority, if not like all the places where we work, require landscape islands, to be developed. It's really important to reduce your heat island effect in parking lots. And so it's something that's very typical. Developers are used to, projects are used to. And so I would say that's not really generally a hindrance. You just have to work it in. And usually there's an end cap area where you would even, like today, you might have a striped kind of thing, moving forward, you just put that island there and it doesn't really change the design of a parking lot. I think your comment on parking requirements, if it's in the back, is good. And I'm interested in that. It would kind of make it, if you didn't require interior parking lot landscaping, if the parking was in the back, that could make it a little bit more enticing to a developer because they wouldn't have that expense. So yeah, that's an interesting thought. I'm curious if anyone else likes that idea, or if we want to kind of approach if kind of parking lots that you can't see from the right of way, if we still need to kind of include that landscaping requirement.
Was the landscaping used for aesthetics? Is that what it's supposed to be for, is for looks?
I would say it's looks, but it's also that environmental aesthetic. The landscaping does help reduce, provide shade, which helps reduce the heat island effect. Landscaping within a parking lot also can be used to help with like drainage and impervious surface to give stormwater a place to go. So there are definitely benefits to landscaping in a parking lot that's not just aesthetics. So again, it's something that is worth thinking about though, because there's also different ways where you could have, kind of similar benefits without the landscaping if it was kind of around the perimeter and not within the parking lot. But again, it kind of just depends.
Yeah, I think you can use that as a way to incentivize people to do what you're trying to get them to do, as far as, building stuff closer to the street if there's less restrictions on the parking in the back.
I agree, but I think you have to balance that with flooding aspects and, the pervious pavement. And, I maybe that's more of a conversation with an engineer. But as long as that's balanced, I think, because again, that landscaping helps with those other things you mentioned.
Yeah, maybe
I
just
agree that-
reduction, but not not a complete removal. I'm sorry, you can go.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, I agree that maybe there would be a way to not require as much, but there does need to be a balance because of the other purposes that it serves. And we definitely don't want flooding.
Yeah, and so maybe we could think about having that regulation be more, landscaping if it's a parking lot that can't be seen from the right of way, your landscaping could be more like clustered and built into that drainage and stormwater, kind of flow, and be more, there for the purpose and not as more kind of the spread out islands that are more aesthetic that you kind of typically see in a parking lot. Like we could look into this and think a little bit more about it, but I like the idea. All right, well, we'll follow back up on that moving forward. So from here on, our next step again is to finalize these parking and landscaping chapters. So we'll take in these comments and then staff's review comments and finalize those. And then we're also going to start drafting signage and lighting. There's a chance we may delay the sign chapter. We're waiting on some decisions from the Supreme Court on signage regulations. And so if Kevin thinks that it would be better to kind of push that a few months to get all those decisions, we may switch the order a little bit. But I'm thinking based on what we base our timing, I can probably do the lighting first and then the signage. But if I need to move things around, we'll let you know, but we're going to keep the process moving regardless. And then we are planning to have a public meeting this summer to kind of bring all the dimensional standards, design standards, and all the parking, landscaping, lighting, all of that to the public for review sometime this summer. So any kind of final questions, thoughts on what we talked about tonight?
Can you make sure you send us the PowerPoint presentation, please?
Yeah, Jeremy has it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll make sure it gets sent out.
That's all I have for you.
All right, well, I think that's all we have. Thanks for your time and a good discussion, and we'll make the revisions we talked about, and we'll be back in front of you, I think, in about a month. So everybody have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.